I cut off all the credit after signing the divorce. At his wedding with the other woman, I spoke just one line. Emily Dawson stood on the courthouse steps with the divorce papers held loosely in her hands, surprised by how light they felt. For years she had imagined this moment as something catastrophic, a collapse she would barely survive, yet now that it had arrived, it felt oddly quiet. The air was cold, the sky a dull gray, and people passed her without noticing, each wrapped in their own urgency. She watched her ex-husband, David Dawson, walk ahead of her with long, confident strides, his posture already free of obligation. He did not turn back. He did not hesitate. He climbed into a sleek black sedan waiting at the curb, leaned toward the passenger seat, and smiled at the young woman sitting there. The car pulled away smoothly, carrying him into a future he had clearly prepared long before leaving her behind. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. Emily remained where she was, breathing slowly until the tightness in her chest loosened. 20 years of marriage had ended not with an argument or tears, but with a stamp and a signature. She felt no rage, no grief sharp enough to knock her down. Instead, there was a hollow space where constant worry used to live. It was unsettling, but it was also strangely peaceful. She reached into her coat pocket and took out her phone, not entirely sure why. Her fingers moved almost automatically as she opened her banking app. The familiar interface appeared, rows of numbers and account details that had once made her stomach clench. Months earlier, David had persuaded her to open a premium credit account in her name, praising her excellent credit and explaining that it would help his construction supply business operate more smoothly. He had spoken calmly, confidently, with the tone of a man who expected agreement. She had applied that same evening, telling herself it was temporary, that marriage meant support, that love required trust. She scrolled down and saw them all listed there, 15 supplementary credit cards, each marked active. She remembered how they had arrived in neat envelopes, how David had distributed them casually, almost generously. One for himself, several for his sister and mother, others for friends and relatives who drifted in and out of their lives. Emily had never used a single one. She had been too careful, too accustomed to minimizing her needs. Her thumb hovered over the first card. She thought of the designer handbag David had bought just weeks earlier, charged to her account without warning. She remembered how he had laughed when she questioned the expense, telling her she worried too much and that money was meant to be used. She thought of the years she had worn the same winter coat while he insisted appearances mattered for business. She tapped cancel. A confirmation prompt appeared. She accepted. A brief message flashed across the screen indicating the card was no longer valid. Emily felt a subtle shift inside her, like a knot loosening. She cancelled the next card, then the next, working through the list slowly and deliberately. Each cancellation felt final, clean, irreversible. By the time she cancelled the 15th card, her breathing had steadied and her hands were no longer tense. She locked her phone and slipped it back into her pocket. On the walk home, she took a longer route than usual, wandering streets she had rarely noticed before. She stopped at a small street cart and bought a bag of roasted nuts, the warmth seeping into her palms. The simple pleasure made her smile faintly. For the first time in years, no one was waiting for her to report in, to justify her choices, to manage their expectations. When she reached her apartment, she set her bag down and took off her coat, enjoying the quiet. The silence had a different quality now. It did not feel oppressive. It felt open. The pounding on the door shattered the calm less than 30 minutes later. It was loud and aggressive, the kind of knocking that assumed obedience. Emily closed her eyes briefly, recognizing the rhythm instantly. She washed her hands slowly at the sink, dried them carefully, and walked to the door without rushing. "Emily, open up," a shrill voice shouted. "Don't pretend you're not home." She opened the door partway and found Karen, David's younger sister, standing there with flushed cheeks and narrowed eyes. Before Emily could say anything, Karen shoved past her and stormed into the living room, her heels striking the floor sharply. She threw her designer purse onto the couch, the metal chain clanging against the wood. Emily's elderly cat, Oliver, startled by the noise, bolted under the sofa. "What is wrong with you?" Karen snapped, spinning around. David just called me. He was at a hotel trying to pay a deposit, and none of the cards worked. The bank said you cancelled them. Fix this right now. Emily crossed her arms, her voice calm. Yes. I cancelled them. Karen stared at her as if she had spoken nonsense. You can't do that. Those cards have been used for years. We rely on them. Emily turned and walked to her desk without answering. She opened a drawer and took out a folder she had kept tucked away, more out of instinct than intention. She returned and placed it on the coffee table. These are the original agreements, Emily said. The account is in my name. Supplementary cards exist at my discretion. Karen flipped through the pages angrily. These are old. David told me he transferred everything into his name a long time ago. Emily pulled out her phone and opened the banking app, holding the screen up so Karen could see. Her name was clearly listed as the primary account holder. If he changed it, Emily said evenly, he can bring proof. Until then, the cards are mine. Karen's anger shifted into desperation. How can you be so cruel? He was booking an engagement party. People were watching. You embarrassed him. Emily felt heat rise in her chest but kept her tone steady. Did he worry about embarrassing me when he used my credit to buy gifts for his girlfriend? When he planned a lavish party on money that wasn't his alone? Karen opened her mouth to respond, then suddenly reached for a glass on the side table, her grip tight. Emily stepped forward slightly. Put it down, she said quietly. If you break anything, I will call the police. And if you keep shouting, I open the door and let the neighbors hear everything. Karen froze. After a long moment, she released the glass, grabbed her purse, and stormed out, muttering threats about telling their mother. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the walls. Emily stood still, listening to the echo fade. Then she knelt down and coaxed Oliver out from hiding, stroking his fur until his purring filled the room. Her hands were steady. Her heart was calm. The doorbell rang again not long after, slower this time, deliberate. Emily opened the door to find Margaret Dawson, her former mother-in-law, standing stiffly in the hallway. Margaret stepped inside without greeting, carrying a cloth bag that thudded onto the coffee table. Apples rolled out and scattered across the floor. Margaret sat down on the couch, deliberately choosing Emily's usual seat, and sighed heavily. She spoke of family, of sacrifice, of forgiveness. She dismissed David's affair as a mistake and reminded Emily of the years they had spent together. Then she tilted her head and said what she had always believed. You never gave him a child, Margaret said. What did you expect? Emily stood without raising her voice and retrieved another folder, thicker and heavier. She laid it open on the table and began showing Margaret receipts, bank statements, and business ledgers. Transfers from their joint business account to David's personal account. Luxury purchases. Dates and amounts clearly marked. Margaret's composure faltered, but pride drove her to theatrics. She slid onto the floor, crying loudly, calling for neighbors. Emily watched for a moment, then opened the door wide. Go ahead, Emily said calmly. Let them come. Let them hear everything. Margaret's crying stopped abruptly. She scrambled to her feet, humiliated, and left without another word. Emily closed and locked the door. She washed the apples and placed them in a bowl, then fed Oliver and sat quietly on the couch. When David called that night, shouting and threatening, she recorded the call and saved it carefully. She lay in bed later, the apartment silent around her. Emily realized something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer reacting. She was choosing. And this, she knew, was only the beginning. The next morning Emily woke with the faint sense that she had stepped onto a moving walkway and could no longer stop it. She lay still for a minute, listening. No pounding on the door, no ringing phone, no voice in the hallway. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft, intermittent tick of the radiator. Oliver was curled at the foot of the bed, his back rising and falling in a slow rhythm that made the room feel steadier than it deserved to feel. She got up, showered, dressed, and moved through her kitchen as if she were learning the space again. For years it had been a staging area for everyone else's needs, the place where she packed lunches, watered down conflict with small kindnesses, and swallowed her opinions with her coffee. Today it was only a kitchen, a table, a sink, a window. She made oatmeal and ate it standing up, not because she had to rush but because she could not yet sit comfortably in her own calm. It felt like waiting for thunder after lightning. Her phone lit up with missed calls and voicemails, mostly from numbers she recognized without needing to save them. Karen's, Margaret's, David's. There were also messages from unfamiliar numbers that she could guess belonged to friends and relatives who had enjoyed the convenience of her credit line without ever acknowledging it as hers. The messages were short and impatient, the tone all accusation and entitlement. Emily did not open them. She began a new habit instead, one that felt both petty and protective. She took screenshots of the call logs and saved them into a folder labeled simply with the date. The quiet lasted until late morning. A knock came, softer than Karen's but no less determined. Emily did not open the door right away. She stood behind it, breathing slowly, and checked the peephole. A man stood there in a grey jacket, holding a small clipboard. A delivery. She opened the door a crack, accepted the package, and closed it again. It was a small box addressed to her, no return name, just a shipping label. Her stomach tightened as she carried it to the table. There were no promises left in her life, only surprises, and she did not trust them. She cut the tape carefully and opened the flaps. Inside was a thick envelope stuffed with printed photographs and a folded note. The photos were glossy, the kind taken in bright indoor lighting, the kind meant to look celebratory. David in a suit jacket, smiling too broadly. A young woman pressed against him, her hand tilted toward the camera to show a ring. A banquet hall with chandeliers and white linens. A menu printed in elegant fonts. Another photo of the same young woman in a white dress standing in front of a mirror, her smile confident, her posture practiced. Emily felt a wave of nausea not because of jealousy but because of the audacity. It was not enough that he had left. He needed to announce that leaving had improved him. The note was short, written in a slanted hand with expensive ink. It told Emily to stop interfering. It declared that David was engaged and that the wedding would be lavish. It implied that Emily had never understood luxury, that Emily should accept her place in the past and move on. The last sentence was a command disguised as advice, telling Emily not to embarrass herself by trying to interfere with their happiness. Emily stared at the words until they blurred. Then she set the note down and began collecting the photographs back into the envelope. She did not tear them. She did not throw them away. She slid them into her evidence folder instead, labeling the envelope with the date and the time it had arrived. The action steadied her. She could not control what people did, but she could control what she kept, what she documented, what she refused to forget. When her phone rang again, she answered, but she did not speak first. She pressed record, watched the small icon appear, and then lifted the phone to her ear. David's voice hit her like an impact, loud and jagged with anger. He did not greet her. He did not ask how she was. He demanded to know what she thought she was doing. He demanded she reverse the cancellations, demanded she stop playing games, demanded she stop ruining his life. The words came in a torrent, frantic and furious, and Emily listened to them the way you listen to a stranger yelling on the street, aware but detached. She said very little, only enough to keep him talking. The more he talked, the more he revealed. He mentioned the hotel. He mentioned the deposit. He mentioned needing the cards just for a few weeks, as if she were obligated to fund his new beginning. He mentioned that Karen had called their mother and that Margaret was furious. He mentioned that if Emily didn't fix things, they would come to her apartment and handle it in person. Emily's hands stayed still on her lap. Oliver, sensing tension, jumped onto the couch beside her and pressed against her thigh. Emily stroked his fur slowly, grounding herself in the simple, undeniable reality of a warm living creature that asked nothing but safety. When David finally paused to inhale, Emily spoke, her voice low and steady. She told him the cards were in her name, and the cancellations were final. She told him she had recorded the call. She told him that if anyone came to her door again, she would call the police. She did not yell. She did not plead. She did not explain herself in the tone of someone seeking permission. She stated facts. David responded the way he always did when he encountered a boundary. He tried to shatter it. His voice rose again, filled with insults and threats. He accused her of bitterness, called her names that would have made her cry years ago. He said she would regret this. He promised she would not live in peace. Emily let him finish, then ended the call. She saved the recording. The feeling that followed was not fear. It was clear. She texted Sarah a simple message telling her David had threatened her and that she had recorded it. Sarah replied instantly, furious on Emily's behalf, and told her to forward the recording to Jonathan Reed. Emily did, attaching it along with screenshots of the call logs and the photos she had received. Less than an hour later, Jonathan called. His tone was calm, professional, and reassuring. He told Emily she had done the right thing documenting everything. He asked if she felt unsafe. Emily admitted that she did not feel afraid in the way she used to, but she did feel alert, like someone walking through a neighborhood where dogs sometimes jumped fences. Jonathan told her to keep her doors locked, to avoid meeting David alone, and to call the police immediately if anyone showed up and refused to leave. He also told her they could file for a protective order if the threats continued. The word protective order made Emily's stomach twist. It sounded dramatic, legal, like something that happened to other people. But she reminded herself that she was now allowed to take herself seriously, allowed to treat threats as real instead of inconveniences she should smooth over. That afternoon, Emily walked to the police station 2 blocks away. The building smelled of disinfectant and old paper. She spoke to an officer at the desk, keeping her voice even, explaining she had received threats and wanted to document them. The officer took her statement, asked her for details, and gave her a case number. The whole interaction was surprisingly ordinary. Emily left with a small slip of paper in her purse and the strange sensation of having done something she once believed she wasn't allowed to do, ask for protection. On her way home, she stopped at the organic market where she was scheduled to begin work the following week. The owner, Karen Whitfield, greeted her warmly and asked how she was settling in. Emily hesitated, then said she was dealing with some personal upheaval but was ready to start fresh. Karen Whitfield's eyes softened with understanding, the kind that came from experience rather than pity. She told Emily that the market was a calm place, that the work was steady, and that the customers were mostly kind. She told Emily that if anyone ever showed up to cause trouble, she would not tolerate it. The certainty in Karen's voice made Emily's shoulders drop a fraction. Back at home, Emily cooked dinner and ate slowly while Oliver watched her with sleepy eyes. She checked her phone again and saw new messages from unknown numbers, some angry, some pleading, some attempting to guilt her with words like family and loyalty and after everything. Emily did not respond. She took screenshots and saved them. Late that night, another friend request appeared on her social media account. The profile picture was the same woman from the photos, her makeup flawless, her smile sharp. The request came with a message that implied authority, as if she were now the manager of Emily's past. Emily's first instinct was to ignore it. Her second instinct was to accept and document. She chose the second. Within seconds, messages arrived in quick succession. They were boastful and aggressive, filled with details of the engagement party, the venue, the cost, the ring, the dress. The tone was designed to humiliate, to provoke a reaction, to prove dominance. The young woman wrote as if Emily were an obstacle that had finally been removed, a defeated rival rather than a person. Emily responded with a single calm sentence, asking how the party was being paid for, since David had been unable to pay a deposit earlier. The response from the young woman came back instantly, furious, calling Emily jealous and delusional. Emily did not argue. Instead, she sent a screenshot from her banking app showing the primary account in her name and the cancelled cards, then another screenshot of a recent charge that had been made before cancellation, a luxury purchase that matched the items in the photos. The young woman's tone shifted, moving from arrogance to defensiveness. She insisted the money was David's. She insisted the divorce meant everything was settled. She insisted Emily should stop trying to cling to what was gone. Emily replied without insult, simply stating that marital assets did not become personal toys just because someone cheated, and that her attorney was already reviewing the financial records. She told the young woman that she might want to be careful about celebrating a future built on money that belonged to someone else. The insult storm that followed was predictable. The young woman called Emily bitter, old, pathetic, and worse. Emily read the messages without reacting, took screenshots of everything, and saved them into her evidence folder. Then, without another word, the young woman blocked her. Emily sat back and exhaled. Oliver jumped onto her lap, turning in a slow circle before settling down. Emily rested her hand on his back and stared at the dark window. The city outside was quiet, streetlights glowing like distant embers. She felt tired, but it was the kind of tiredness that came after doing something difficult and necessary. The kind of tiredness that belonged to someone who had stopped pretending. In the morning, Sarah came over with coffee and pastries. They sat at Emily's table, and Emily showed her the screenshots and recordings. Sarah's face tightened with anger. She said what Emily was only beginning to believe, that David was not just careless, he was reckless, and his recklessness would keep escalating as long as he believed Emily would absorb the consequences. Emily spent the rest of the day preparing. She organized documents into labeled folders. She printed screenshots. She backed up audio files to a cloud drive and an external thumb drive. She wrote down timelines with dates and amounts. The work was tedious, but with each organized stack of paper, she felt stronger. The following afternoon, Jonathan called with an update. He said they were filing requests for full financial disclosure, that they would trace transfers, and that they would challenge any improper division of assets that had been based on misinformation. He said Emily's documentation made their case significantly easier. He reminded her again to avoid direct contact with David except through legal channels. When Emily hung up, she sat quietly for a long moment, absorbing the shift. 4 years she had lived as if her survival depended on keeping David calm. Now she was learning that her survival depended on something else entirely, refusing to be managed by his moods. That evening, David called again. Emily watched the screen light up with his name and felt a familiar flicker of anxiety, but it was smaller now, contained. She let it ring. He called again. Then again. She did not answer. She saved the missed call screenshots. Midnight. A final message arrived from David, written in all caps, promising he would come in person if she didn't fix what she had broken. Emily stared at it for a few seconds, then typed a single reply, careful and controlled, telling him not to come and informing him she had documented his threats and filed a police report. She did not add emotion. She did not add an argument. She added facts. She put her phone down and went to bed. Sleep did not come immediately. Her mind replayed old scenes like a slideshow, David laughing when she worried, Margaret criticizing her, Karen demanding, the young woman boasting. The memories felt like splinters, small but sharp. Emily rolled onto her side and reached down to touch Oliver's warm fur. The cat purred, steady and mindless, a small engine of comfort. Emily stared into the dark and realized that what terrified her most was not them showing up, not the yelling, not the threats. What terrified her most was the possibility of slipping back into who she had been, the woman who apologized for existing, the woman who paid for peace with her own dignity. She closed her eyes and promised herself she would not go backward. Outside, the city moved on. Somewhere, David was still constructing a fantasy built on borrowed money and intimidation. Somewhere, Margaret and Karen were still convinced they could pressure Emily into compliance. Somewhere, the young woman was still clinging to the illusion that winning a man meant winning the life he claimed to provide. Emily's apartment remained quiet. The quiet was not emptiness anymore, it was space. Emily's first week at the organic market began with the smell of damp earth and citrus. She arrived early each morning, the sun barely up, sleeves rolled, hands busy sorting crates of produce delivered before dawn. The work was physical in a way her old life had not been. She lifted boxes, checked invoices, arranged displays, and learned to tell freshness by touch and scent rather than labels and promises. It grounded her. When her mind drifted toward unfinished confrontations and looming court dates, the work pulled her back with simple demands. Stack, weigh, count, wipe, repeat. Karen Whitfield watched her quietly those first days, noticing how Emily kept meticulous records, how she double-checked totals, and how she spoke gently to customers. On the third morning, Karen handed Emily the store's inventory log and asked her to take over tracking daily stock. Emily accepted without ceremony, flipping through the pages with the familiarity of someone who had kept books for years without credit or praise. It felt good to be trusted again, to have responsibility that did not come with emotional debt. During her breaks, Emily checked her phone. There were fewer messages now, fewer missed calls. The storm had moved into a watchful lull. Jonathan sent short updates confirming requests filed, subpoenas pending, timelines forming. Sarah sent encouragement and jokes, a steady thread of warmth that reminded Emily she was not navigating this alone. The quiet between messages felt earned rather than ominous. On Thursday afternoon, as Emily restocked apples, her phone vibrated. A number she recognized flashed on the screen. She stepped into the small storage room, closed the door, and answered after pressing record. David's voice sounded different. It was controlled, almost pleasant, the tone he used when he wanted something and believed charm might still work. He said he wanted to talk, that they could meet somewhere neutral, that they should resolve things like adults. He said lawyers made everything harder and that dragging this out would only hurt both of them. Emily leaned against a shelf of paper bags and listened. She noticed the way he avoided specifics, the way he framed his problems as mutual burdens. She remembered how often she had accepted those reframings in the past, how easily she had been convinced that fairness meant surrender. She told him she would not meet alone and that all communication should go through her attorney. She told him she was working and did not have time to discuss personal matters. When he pressed, she repeated herself. When he sighed theatrically, she remained silent. Eventually he hung up. Emily saved the recording and returned to the floor. That night, she walked home with groceries tucked under her arm, the city air cool and clear. At her door, she noticed a small envelope taped crookedly to the frame. Her name was written on it in Margaret's handwriting. Emily took it down and went inside before opening it. The letter inside was heavy with familiar language. It spoke of disappointment and sacrifice, of tradition and obligation. It accused Emily of being ungrateful, of tearing a family apart, of punishing everyone for one man's mistakes. It asked her to think of appearances, of what neighbors would say, of how much easier life could be if she simply let things go. Emily read it once, then again, noticing how none of the words acknowledged her pain or her losses. The letter framed her as a disruption rather than a person who had been wronged. She folded it neatly and placed it in her evidence folder. Then she wrote the date on the envelope and slid it into place. She fed Oliver, ate a simple dinner, and slept deeply. The following week brought movement. Jonathan called with details. Financial records were coming in. Transfers had been identified, amounts traced, timelines aligned. Some purchases matched dates Emily remembered vividly, days when David had come home late smelling of cologne she did not own, days when she had balanced the books and wondered why numbers never quite matched expectations. Jonathan explained how these details would be presented, how patterns mattered more than isolated incidents. Emily listened, asked questions, took notes. She felt like a student learning a new language, one that translated lived experience into enforceable reality. Midweek, Sarah invited Emily to lunch. They met at a quiet cafe near the park, sitting by a window where sunlight spilled across the table. Over sandwiches and iced tea, Sarah told Emily about a friend of hers who worked at a hotel downtown, someone involved in event planning. She mentioned, almost casually, that David had been in recently, asking about a large engagement party. Emily's fork paused midair. Sarah watched her carefully. "I didn't ask for details," she said. "But if you want, I can." Emily felt a familiar urge to shrink, to avoid, to let other people's plans proceed unchallenged. Then she thought of the envelope taped to her door, of the threats recorded on her phone, of the money that had disappeared while she made excuses for him. She set her fork down. "If it's appropriate," she said, choosing her words, "it might be useful to know." Sarah nodded, already texting. 2 days later, they met again, this time with more information. The party was scheduled for later in the month. The venue was expensive, the guest list long. The deposit had been partial, the balance outstanding. David had made assurances and requested extensions. He had talked about success and generosity, about wanting everything to look impressive. Emily listened without interrupting. A plan began forming, not as a burst of anger but as a sequence of possibilities. She did not speak it aloud yet. She wanted to understand the boundaries, the risks, the purpose. She did not want spectacle for its own sake. She wanted clarity. That evening, she spoke with Jonathan and explained what she had learned. He listened carefully, then advised caution. He explained what was permissible, what could backfire, what could strengthen her case if handled correctly. He suggested patience, documentation, and timing. He suggested that if Emily chose to confront the situation publicly, it should be done without disruption or aggression, anchored firmly in evidence. Emily thanked him and ended the call. She sat at her table and stared at the wall for a long time. Oliver jumped up and settled beside her, stretching and kneading the fabric of her sweater. The cat's presence was a reminder of continuity, of small, living constants. The next day at work, a woman Emily recognized as a regular customer lingered near the register. She waited until the line cleared and then leaned closer, lowering her voice. She said she had heard things. She said people were talking. She said she was glad Emily was here now, that the store felt calmer, better organized. She said she hoped Emily was doing okay. Emily thanked her, surprised by the kindness. She realized that stories traveled quickly, but so did reputations. 4 years, hers had been invisible, absorbed into someone else's narrative. Now, fragments of the truth were surfacing, not because she announced them, but because she stopped hiding. On Saturday morning, Emily received an email from Jonathan with an attachment labeled Preliminary Findings. She opened it slowly. The document detailed transfers from the business account to David's personal account, followed by purchases and payments that had nothing to do with business operations. Dates aligned with hotel bookings, luxury items, and cash withdrawals. There was also mention of outstanding debts unrelated to the business, amounts that suggested risk-taking she had never known about. Emily closed her laptop and rested her forehead against her hands. The revelation did not shock her as much as it clarified things. It explained the volatility, the sudden demands, the constant pressure to keep credit available. It explained the way David's confidence often felt brittle, rehearsed. She called Sarah and told her everything. Sarah listened, furious, then said what Emily had begun to think about herself. That the engagement party was not just a celebration, it was a performance meant to reassure everyone, including David, that he was still in control. That the truth would puncture that illusion. Emily spent the weekend preparing. She did not rehearse speeches or imagine dramatic confrontations. She organized documents. She made copies. She labeled files clearly and concisely. She practiced breathing through discomfort. She reminded herself of her purpose. Not revenge, but resolution. On Sunday evening, Margaret called again. Emily let it go to voicemail. The message that followed was softer than previous ones, almost conciliatory. It spoke of compromise and moving forward. It suggested that perhaps Emily could attend the engagement party as a sign of goodwill, a way to show there were no hard feelings. Emily deleted the message without saving it. She stood at her window and watched the city lights flicker on one by one. Somewhere, David was likely rehearsing his own narrative, smoothing edges, convincing himself that charm and confidence would carry him through as they always had. Somewhere, plans were being finalized on credit that no longer existed, promises being made with money that had already been counted elsewhere. Emily felt no urge to confront him immediately. Time was working in her favor now. Evidence accumulated quietly. Support systems strengthened. She was no longer scrambling to react. She was choosing when and how to act. When she went to bed, she dreamed not of arguments or courtrooms, but of walking through a wide open space, unencumbered, carrying only what she needed. The days leading up to the engagement party unfolded with an almost eerie calm. Emily went to work each morning, tied her apron, and immersed herself in the routines of the market. Customers greeted her by name now. Some asked her opinion on produce, others lingered to talk about weather or neighborhood news. These small exchanges stitched her back into a world she had once drifted through invisibly. When she locked the store at night and walked home under the streetlights, she felt anchored by fatigue earned honestly, not drained by emotional vigilance. At home, she refined her preparation. Jonathan had advised precision, not drama. Evidence needed context, sequence, restraint. Emily spent evenings reviewing documents, aligning dates, making sure nothing contradicted anything else. She printed duplicates and placed them into a slim black folder, not the bulky binders she had first considered. She wanted to move lightly, deliberately. She backed up recordings onto a second drive and placed it in her coat pocket, then practiced pulling out her phone smoothly without fumbling. These were not acts of obsession. They were acts of readiness. Sarah checked in daily. Sometimes she brought food, sometimes just herself. They talked about work, about plans for the future, about small joys Emily had forgotten she was allowed to anticipate. One evening, Sarah told her that the hotel contact had confirmed the party was still scheduled. The balance on the venue had not been paid. Extensions had been granted. Assurances repeated. Emily felt no surge of triumph, only confirmation. Jonathan called 2 nights before the event. He had received additional financial disclosures. Some funds had been used to cover personal debts unrelated to the marriage or business. Gambling losses. Cash advances. Patterns of behavior that painted a clearer picture of recklessness. Jonathan explained how these details could strengthen Emily's claim and how they should be handled carefully. He also told her he would be present at the hotel that evening, arriving early, available if needed. Emily thanked him, feeling the weight of support settle around her like armor. The morning of the party dawned clear and bright. Emily woke early, fed Oliver, and dressed slowly. She chose neutral colors, clothes that blended rather than announced. She did not want to be seen as spectacle before she chose to be seen at all. She placed the folder and phone into her bag, checked the batteries, and paused at the door. Oliver rubbed against her legs, purring insistently. She knelt and kissed the top of his head, whispering that she would be back soon. She met Sarah near the hotel an hour before the event. The building rose sleek and polished, glass reflecting the sky. Guests were already arriving, dressed in formal wear, laughter spilling out as valets moved briskly. Emily and Sarah entered through a side entrance, guided by a staff member Sarah's contact had arranged. They were led down a quiet hallway to a small waiting area near the banquet hall. The muffled sound of music and voices drifted through the walls. Emily sat and waited, hands folded, breathing evenly. She felt present, alert, but not overwhelmed. This was not the trembling anticipation of confrontation she once would have known. This was focus. When the staff member returned, she nodded gently and gestured toward the hall. Emily rose and followed, stepping into the edge of the room as the ceremony reached its formal opening. The decor was lavish, just as the photographs had promised. White linens, tall floral arrangements, warm lighting. David stood near the front, impeccably dressed, smiling broadly. Beside him, the young woman glowed with confidence, her posture practiced, her expression proud. Emily took a few steps forward, stopping near the aisle. She waited until the music softened and the officiant's voice filled the room. When he asked if there were any objections, the question felt ceremonial, symbolic, a formality rarely meant to be answered. Emily spoke clearly, not loudly. "I have something that needs to be addressed." The room stilled. Heads turned. David's smile faltered, then froze. His eyes found Emily, widening in disbelief. The young woman stiffened, confusion flashing across her face. Emily stepped forward one more pace and held up the folder. She did not rush. She did not raise her voice. She spoke as if addressing a room full of colleagues rather than adversaries. She stated that the event's financial arrangements were incomplete. She explained that the venue's required deposit had not been paid in full and that extensions had been granted based on assurances that were still unmet. She held up a copy of the contract, visible enough for nearby guests to see. Murmurs rippled outward, quiet at first, then building. David tried to interrupt, his voice sharp, dismissive. Emily did not respond to his tone. She continued. She explained that the funds being used for this celebration were not solely David's to spend. She described the business account, the transfers, the dates. She did not accuse. She presented facts. She showed documentation, turning pages slowly so that anyone inclined could see. She explained that significant sums had been diverted without consent during the marriage and used for personal expenses unrelated to shared obligations. The young woman's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. She looked at David, searching his face for reassurance that did not come. Emily took out her phone and played a short recording, just long enough to demonstrate tone and content. David's voice filled the room briefly, threatening, demanding. Emily stopped the recording and lowered the phone. She said she had not come to cause chaos or humiliation. She had come to correct a narrative. She had come to ensure that a performance built on misrepresentation did not proceed unchallenged. Silence held the room. Then whispers grew louder. A few guests stood, discomfort clear. Someone near the back shook their head and muttered something about integrity. The officiant stepped back uncertainly. A hotel manager appeared at the edge of the room, concern etched into his face. David spoke then, loudly, angrily, calling Emily names, accusing her of bitterness. His composure cracked under pressure, his voice rising in ways that betrayed more than words could. The contrast between his reaction and Emily's calm was unmistakable. The young woman stepped away from him slowly, her face pale. She asked him questions he could not answer convincingly. Guests began to leave, some quietly, others openly critical. The atmosphere shifted from celebration to scrutiny. Emily closed her folder and stepped back. She did not linger. She did not watch the unraveling any longer than necessary. Sarah touched her arm, and together they turned and walked out, leaving the noise behind them. Outside, the air felt cooler, cleaner. Emily exhaled deeply, the tension draining from her shoulders. Sarah hugged her, fierce and quick, whispering that she had been incredible. Jonathan joined them moments later, confirming that everything had gone as well as could be expected, that no lines had been crossed, that the evidence was solid. Emily nodded, listening, but her attention drifted upward to the sky, now streaked with the colors of late afternoon. She felt lighter, as if something heavy had finally been set down. When she returned home that evening, Oliver greeted her at the door with insistent meows. Emily laughed softly, scooping him up and holding him close. She fed him, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat on the couch, letting the quiet settle around her once more. Her phone buzzed with messages she did not open. She already knew their content. She turned the phone face down and rested her head against the back of the couch. For the first time in years, the chapter felt closed, not by avoidance or endurance, but by clarity. The fallout did not arrive all at once. It came in waves, each one smaller than the last, like the sea retreating after a storm. Emily woke the morning after the party expecting chaos, her body conditioned by years of bracing for impact, but the apartment was quiet. Light filtered through the curtains, and Oliver sat on the windowsill watching pigeons with solemn focus. For a moment, Emily simply stood there, absorbing the ordinariness of the scene. Ordinary felt like a gift. Her phone, when she finally picked it up, was heavy with notifications. Missed calls, messages, voicemails. Some were angry, others desperate, a few oddly apologetic. David's name appeared more than any other. Emily did not listen to the voicemails. She forwarded them to Jonathan and archived the rest. She had learned that not every sound required her attention, that silence could be an answer. Jonathan called later that morning. His voice was steady, professional, but there was a note of satisfaction beneath it. He explained that the hotel had formally documented the incident, including the unpaid balance and the disruption caused by David's misrepresentations. Several business contacts had withdrawn from ongoing dealings with him, citing concerns about credibility. The paper trail, already substantial, was now undeniable. "The court will not look kindly on this pattern," Jonathan said. "You did not escalate. You clarified. That matters." Emily thanked him and ended the call. She made coffee and drank it slowly, sitting at the table where she had once sorted receipts in secret, afraid of what they might mean. Now the same table held only a mug and a folded newspaper. The fear that had once lived there had been replaced by something quieter and sturdier. Over the next week, pieces of information filtered back to her through Sarah and others. David's engagement had dissolved abruptly. The young woman had moved out of his apartment within days. There were arguments witnessed by neighbors, raised voices, slammed doors. David's mother and sister, once so confident in their moral authority, had retreated into bitter silence, blaming one another for how everything had gone wrong. Their certainty, once so loud, had evaporated. Emily felt no satisfaction in these reports, only distance. Their turmoil no longer reached her. She had stepped outside the radius of their chaos-dirty work. Life continued with gentle insistence. The market bustled as usual. Emily took pride in small efficiencies she introduced, in cleaner systems, in the way customers lingered longer now that the atmosphere felt warmer. Karen Whitfield noticed and, without fanfare, increased Emily's hours and responsibilities. One afternoon, she mentioned the possibility of a raise in the coming months if things continued as they were. Emily walked home that night with a sense of possibility she had not felt in decades. It was not excitement exactly, but openness. The future no longer felt like a narrowing tunnel. It felt like a road with branches she was finally allowed to explore. Jonathan called again 2 weeks later. The court had issued orders compelling David to return diverted funds and to provide full disclosure of remaining assets. There were deadlines now, consequences. Jonathan explained the next steps calmly, methodically, as if discussing a renovation rather than the dismantling of a life built on deception. And one more thing, he added. If he contacts you again directly, let me know immediately. The pattern of harassment is clear. Emily agreed. When the call ended, she sat quietly, letting the weight of finality settle. There would be no reconciliation, no last-minute apologies that undid the past. There would only be accountability, enforced by structures she had once been too intimidated to trust. That evening, David did call. Once. Emily watched the phone ring, then went silent. She did not record this time. She did not need to. The silence itself was enough. Days turned into weeks. The legal process moved forward, steady and impersonal. Funds were recovered. Accounts were closed. Papers were signed. Each step stripped away another thread tying Emily to a story that no longer belonged to her. She began spending her weekends differently. She walked in the park with Sarah, sat on benches and watched children play. Dogs chased sticks. Couples argued softly and then laughed. She cooked meals she liked, experimented with flavors she had once avoided because David disliked them. She rearranged her apartment, moving furniture simply because she wanted to see how it felt. She donated clothes she associated with old versions of herself and bought a new coat that fit properly, warm and unremarkable and entirely hers. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped her in the hallway and commented on how relaxed she seemed lately. Emily smiled and said she felt that way too. The neighbor nodded knowingly, as if recognizing something familiar to the market. An elderly customer named Mrs. Turner began bringing Emily homemade cookies every Friday. They talked about gardening, about weather, about nothing important at all. The simplicity of the exchange felt restorative. Emily realized how starved she had been for interactions without ulterior motives. Occasionally, fragments of the past surfaced unexpectedly. A song on the radio. A street they had once driven down together. In those moments, Emily felt a brief, dull ache, not of longing but of recognition. She allowed it to pass without judgment. Healing, she was learning, did not require erasing memory. It required changing its weight. One evening, as she locked up the store, Karen Whitfield asked Emily to stay back for a moment. They sat in the small office at the rear, papers stacked neatly on the desk. "I've been meaning to say this," Karen said. "You've brought stability here. Not just competence. People feel it." Emily thanked her, a little embarrassed. "I'd like to make your position permanent," Karen continued, "with a salary adjustment. And eventually, if you're interested, more leadership." Emily felt a swell of emotion that surprised her. She nodded, finding her voice. "I'd like that very much." Walking home that night, she felt something settle firmly into place. Not triumph. Not vindication. Belonging. To herself, to her life as it was becoming rather than as it had been endured. That weekend, she took Oliver to the vet for a routine checkup. The veterinarian commented on how content he seemed, how well cared for. Emily laughed softly, realizing that the care flowed both ways. They were a small household, but a complete one. Months passed. The legal matters concluded fully. The last check arrived, deposited cleanly into Emily's account. She stared at the balance for a long time, not because of greed, but because of what it represented, proof that preparation and persistence could restore what had been taken. She did not celebrate with extravagance. She paid bills, set aside savings, and treated herself to a weekend trip to a quiet coastal town. She walked along the shore alone, the wind sharp and bracing, the horizon endless. She felt present in her body, grounded in a way she had not been since before her marriage. On her final night there, she sat on a bench overlooking the water and thought about the woman she had been at the courthouse months earlier, standing with papers in her hand, unsure whether freedom would feel like loss. She smiled gently at the memory. Freedom, she had learned, did not announce itself with fireworks. It arrived quietly, in the absence of fear, in the ability to say no without apology, in mornings that began without dread. It arrived in the confidence to protect oneself without becoming hardened. When Emily returned home, she slipped back into her routines easily. Work, friendships, quiet evenings. The story that had once dominated her thoughts receded into something finished, archived like the folders she had carefully labeled and stored away. One night, as she prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the mirror. There were lines she did not remember earning, shadows of years spent shrinking. But there was also steadiness in her eyes, an ease in her posture. She looked like someone who trusted herself. Emily turned off the light and climbed into bed. Oliver settled beside her, a warm weight against her side. Outside, the city hummed softly, indifferent and alive. She closed her eyes, not thinking of what she had escaped, but of what she was building. The following spring arrived quietly, without ceremony, and Emily noticed it not by the calendar but by the way the light lingered longer in the evenings. The city seemed to exhale with her. Windows stayed open. People walked slower. Conversations spilled onto sidewalks. Life no longer felt like something happening somewhere else while she waited. Emily's routines deepened into something resembling contentment. She woke early, fed Oliver, brewed coffee, and stood by the window for a few minutes before leaving for work, watching the street come alive. The market had become a place where she belonged rather than performed. She knew which suppliers were reliable, which customers preferred small talk, which elderly regulars needed help carrying bags to their cars. She took pride in knowing these details, not because anyone demanded excellence from her, but because she chose it. Karen Whitfield followed through on her word. Emily's role expanded gradually, naturally. She began managing orders, negotiating prices, and training new hires. The work was demanding but honest, and at the end of each day, her tiredness felt clean. Money arrived predictably. Bills were paid on time. The anxiety that had once lived permanently beneath her ribs faded into memory. David did not disappear entirely, but he no longer loomed. His name surfaced occasionally through distant acquaintances or fragments of neighborhood gossip. He moved apartments more than once. His business never recovered. Some said he blamed Emily for everything, others said he blamed everyone but himself. None of it mattered. His story had slipped out of her hands and out of her responsibility. Margaret never contacted her again. Karen once sent a message asking Emily to reconsider, to help smooth things over for the sake of family. Emily did not respond. Silence was not cruelty. It was clarity. Emily's social world expanded in quiet, unexpected ways. She joined Sarah and a small group of friends for weekend walks. She attended a pottery class at a community center and discovered she enjoyed the sensation of clay yielding under her hands, forgiving and responsive in a way life had not always been. She made a lopsided bowl and kept it anyway, amused by its imperfection. One evening, after closing the market, Emily sat on the front step with Karen Whitfield, sharing a container of takeout noodles. They talked about past lives, about mistakes made and lessons learned. Karen spoke of her own divorce years earlier, of the fear she had felt starting over. Emily listened, realizing how many women carried similar stories quietly, stitched beneath daily routines. "You don't come out of something like that unchanged," Karen said. "But you come out more yourself." Emily nodded, understanding the home. Oliver aged gently. His steps slowed. He slept more. Emily adjusted her routines around him without resentment, grateful for the constancy he offered. Evenings were often spent reading or listening to music, the apartment filled with a sense of peace she once believed was reserved for other people. Occasionally, Emily encountered reminders of the past. A mutual acquaintance crossed her path at a store and offered awkward condolences. A song played that once marked a shared anniversary. These moments no longer knocked the air from her lungs. They passed through her like weather, acknowledged but not absorbed. One afternoon, Jonathan invited her to lunch. They met in a quiet restaurant near his office. He congratulated her on the resolution of her case, on her composure throughout the process. He said not everyone handled betrayal with such restraint and preparation. "You protected yourself," he said. "That's not something everyone learns how to do." Emily thanked him, feeling a flicker of pride. She realized she no longer associated that chapter with humiliation. It had become a testament to her capacity rather than her vulnerability. Summer arrived in full, noisy bloom. Emily took a short vacation, traveling alone to a small lakeside town. She woke early each morning and swam in cool water, cooked simple meals, and wrote in a notebook without purpose or audience. She wrote about ordinary days, about moments that felt complete. She wrote not to remember pain, but to honor presence. On her last evening there, she sat on the dock and watched the sun dip below the waterline, staining the sky with soft color. She thought of the woman she had been for so long, shrinking to keep peace, believing endurance was the same as love. She felt compassion for that version of herself, not regret. That woman had survived long enough to become this one. When Emily returned home, Oliver greeted her with indignant affection, as if scolding her for leaving. She laughed and held him close, promising silently that this life, quiet and hard-earned, would be protected. In the months that followed, Emily was asked for advice more often than she expected. A co-worker confided about a failing marriage. A neighbor spoke of financial worries. Emily never lectured. She spoke from experience when asked, emphasizing preparation, independence, and the courage to stop explaining oneself to people committed to misunderstanding. Autumn returned, painting the city in gold and rust. Emily walked through fallen leaves with Sarah, hands tucked into pockets, breathing air that smelled of change. She felt grounded in her body, in her choices, in the life she had assembled piece by piece. One evening, as she locked her apartment door, she paused and looked around. The space felt complete. Not perfect. Complete. Every object had been chosen by her. Every routine existed because she wanted it. Emily understood now that justice did not always roar. Sometimes it arrived as quiet stability. Sometimes it looked like mornings without fear, nights without dread, and the steady confidence of knowing that no one else could dismantle her life without her consent. She turned off the lights, settled into bed, and listened to Oliver's steady breathing beside her. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent and generous all at once. Emily closed her eyes, not waiting for the next storm, not bracing for impact, but resting in the certainty that whatever came next, she would.